The massive crystal dome of Nexus Prime buzzed with familiar chatter as representatives from 7 major species gathered for their monthly council meeting. Ambassador Veltar, his blue-scaled skin catching the artificial starlight, shuffled through ancient data files on his holographic display. The routine had become almost boring after decades of the same discussions about trade routes, mining rights, and border disputes. The Zephyrian convoy reports another delay in the Outer Rim shipments, announced Council Speaker Morden, his tentacles waving dismissively. Standard piracy issues, nothing we haven't handled before. Veltar barely listened as he scrolled through outdated records, looking for anything remotely interesting to break the monotony. His clawed finger paused on an entry marked with a yellow warning symbol. The file was old, really old, dating back almost 3 centuries. The header read, Species Classification, Humans, Origin, Sol System, Status, Unknown. Hey, does anyone remember hearing about something called humans? Veltar asked during a lull in the conversation. The chamber fell silent for a moment before erupting in amused clicks, chirps, and what passed for laughter among the various species. Council Speaker Morden's eyes bulged slightly as he accessed his own historical databases. Oh, those primitive bipeds from that little blue planet, Morden's voice carried clear amusement. They used to send out these pathetic radio signals centuries ago, weak electromagnetic pulses that barely reached beyond their own star system. Representative Clixara, whose insect-like features twitched with what might have been a smile, added her own commentary. I remember studying them in xenobiology classes. They had these ridiculous conflicts over resources, while their planet was practically drowning in water. Completely irrational species. They went quiet ages ago, Veltar continued reading from the file. Last recorded transmission was, 247 years ago. Just stopped broadcasting entirely one day. Probably wiped themselves out, suggested another representative. Most primitive species do that eventually, either through warfare, environmental collapse, or disease. Standard evolutionary dead end. The casual dismissal sent ripples of agreement through the chamber. It was a common story throughout the galaxy. Young civilizations would make initial contact attempts, broadcast their location to the stars, then vanish within a few generations. The universe was littered with the ruins of species who had reached too far too fast. Meanwhile, in the distant Sol System, Hyunwoo's eyes opened for the first time in over 2 centuries. The cryogenic pod hissed as it released him, and his enhanced consciousness immediately connected to the vast network that humanity had become. His first thought was a question that echoed through millions of linked minds. Are we ready to return? So Young stood before a massive array of quantum transmitters, her fingers dancing over controls that could reach across the galaxy instantaneously. The deep space monitoring stations had been tracking galactic communications for decades, learning, listening, preparing. She turned to her team with a slight smile. Initiate the signal, she said softly. It's time they remembered we exist. The Galactic Council continued their mundane discussions, completely unaware that the species they had just dismissed as extinct was about to change everything they thought they knew about power in the universe. The alarm klaxons screamed across 3 different sectors simultaneously, their urgent wails cutting through the normal hum of deep space monitoring stations. Technician Calvin nearly dropped his nutrient drink as his console exploded with readings that shouldn't have been possible. The signal was coming from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing every known communication protocol like they were children's toys. This can't be right, he muttered, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he recalibrated his equipment. The readings remained the same. Someone was transmitting directly through subspace itself, using technology that made their most advanced systems look primitive. At Station Gamma 7, Senior Operator Thexani was having the same impossible experience. Her tentacles wrapped around multiple control surfaces as she tried to trace the signal's origin. Every time she thought she had pinpointed the source, it seemed to shift, coming from dozens of locations simultaneously across the Sol System. "Commander," she called out, her voice barely steady, "you need to see this immediately." Commander Rixtal slithered over to her station, his serpentine body coiling with tension. The message playing on the speakers was clear, spoken in perfect galactic standard, but with an accent none of them had heard in centuries. Humanity requests audience with the Galactic Council. We have much to discuss. The words repeated 3 times, then silence. But the technological signature left behind was like nothing in their databases. The transmission had somehow reached every major communication hub in 3 sectors within the same nanosecond, defying the basic laws of physics that governed their faster-than-light communications. Back on Nexus Prime, the emergency council session was already underway. The same message had been received by every major power simultaneously, and the implications were staggering. Ambassador Veltar, who had casually dismissed humanity just hours earlier, now sat in stunned silence as xenobiologists and historians scrambled to pull up every scrap of information about the supposedly extinct species. The signal's strength alone should have been impossible, reported Chief Communications Officer Dulmar. It would require power output equivalent to a small star, and that's just for the transmission. The simultaneous delivery across multiple sectors suggests technology we can't even theorize about. In the Sol system, Yunji monitored the galactic response from her position aboard the orbital platform surrounding what had once been called Earth. The planet below bore little resemblance to the blue marble of humanity's past. Crystalline structures reached into space like fingers, while vast energy networks pulsed with power that could reshape matter at the atomic level. "They're panicking," she reported to the collective consciousness that now linked every human mind across the solar system. 3 emergency council sessions have been called in the past hour. Yunwu, now fully awakened and integrated with humanity's evolved network, smiled at the irony. The same species who had laughed at primitive radio signals were now trembling at the sound of human voices returning to the galaxy. They had no idea what humanity had become during their centuries of silence. The transformation hadn't been voluntary at first. Environmental collapse, resource depletion, and the discovery of their cosmic insignificance had nearly destroyed the species. But instead of giving up, humanity had chosen evolution. They had rebuilt themselves, their world, and their understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes silence doesn't mean extinction. Sometimes it means preparation. Commander Jinho stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the Sol system grow larger on the main display. His fleet of 12 ships represented the most advanced technology the Altarian Empire could offer, equipped with sensors that could detect a single grain of sand from a light year away. He expected to find debris fields, maybe some primitive survivors struggling on a dying world. What he found instead made his blood run cold. "Sir," his sensor operator whispered, her voice barely audible. "The readings, they don't make sense." The Sol system had been completely transformed. Where once a single yellow star had burned alone, now 3 additional stars blazed with artificial light, their surfaces covered in massive geometric structures that harvested energy on an unimaginable scale. Dyson spheres, Jinho realized, but built with such precision and scale that they made theoretical models look like children's drawings. "Those structures around the stars," his science officer reported, his voice shaking. "They're not just collecting energy, they're converting matter directly into usable power. The energy output it's equivalent to the entire galactic core." But the stars were just the beginning. Space itself was filled with constructions that defied comprehension. Habitat rings larger than planets rotated slowly, their surfaces covered in what looked like cities that stretched beyond the horizon. Massive ships, if they could even be called ships, moved between these structures like living things, their designs flowing and organic rather than the rigid metal boxes that dominated galactic technology. "Commander," the communications officer called out, her voice tight with fear. "We're being scanned, but it's not like any scanning technology we know. It feels like something is looking directly into our minds." Jinho felt it too, a gentle presence that seemed to examine not just their ships but their intentions, their memories, their very souls. It wasn't invasive or threatening, but it was absolutely overwhelming in its completeness. Whatever was scanning them understood everything about them in a matter of seconds. Then Earth itself came into view, and Jin-Ho's legs nearly gave out. The planet that had once been called a pale blue dot now pulsed with energy that could be seen from space. The surface was covered in structures that seemed to grow rather than being built, reaching into the atmosphere like massive trees made of crystal and light. The oceans still existed, but they glowed with bioluminescent life that had been enhanced. Beyond natural evolution. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," the communications officer announced. "It's coming from everywhere. The entire system is broadcasting to us." The voice that filled the bridge was calm, friendly, and unmistakably human. "Welcome to the Sol System, Commander Jin-Ho. I am Tai Min, Defense Coordinator for this sector. We've been expecting you." Jin-Ho's mind reeled. They knew his name, his rank, probably his entire service record. But more than that, they had been expecting him. The humans hadn't just survived their disappearance from galactic affairs. They had used that time to become something that made every other species in the galaxy look like primitives playing with fire. "We know you have questions," the voice continued. "HFY, our diplomatic liaison, will meet with you aboard the orbital platform. Please, don't be afraid. We're still human, even if we're no longer quite what we used to be." As Jin-Ho's ship was gently guided toward a docking facility that materialized out of seemingly empty space, he realized that everything the galaxy thought it knew about power, technology, and evolution was about to change forever. The docking bay that materialized around Jin-Ho's ship defied every law of physics he understood. Walls formed from what appeared to be liquid light, solidifying into a breathable atmosphere that perfectly matched his ship's environmental settings. As he stepped out with his diplomatic team, HFY approached them with a warm smile that seemed genuinely human, despite everything else about her that had clearly changed. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain galaxies, and when she moved, it was with a fluid grace that suggested she could manipulate gravity itself. Yet her voice carried the same warmth and humor that ancient human recordings had displayed centuries ago. "Commander Jin-Ho, welcome to New Terra," she said, gesturing to the massive structure around them. "I know this must be overwhelming. It was for us, too, at first." Jin-Ho's science officer pulled out his scanner, trying to get readings on the technology surrounding them. The device immediately shut down, not damaged, but simply rendered obsolete by whatever forces were at work here. "Your scanner won't work." "Here," HFY explained gently. "We've moved beyond electromagnetic technology, but please let me show you what we've become." She led them through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked, always providing the perfect environment and lighting for their comfort. Along the way, they encountered other humans, each one clearly enhanced, but retaining something, essentially human in their expressions and mannerisms. "We didn't choose this transformation initially," HFY continued as they walked. "When we went silent, it was because our world was dying. Climate collapse, resource depletion, social breakdown. We were facing extinction." They entered a vast chamber where Dongwu waited, his form flickering between solid matter and pure energy. Jin-Ho's team instinctively stepped back, but Dongwu's laugh was entirely human. "Don't worry," Dongwu said, stabilizing into a more conventional appearance. "I'm still me. Watch this." He gestured toward a piece of metal debris floating in the chamber. Before their eyes, the metal began to change, its atomic structure rearranging itself into a perfect crystal, then into a flowering plant, then back into metal again. Matter conversion at the quantum level, performed as easily as breathing. "We learned that consciousness and matter are connected in ways we never imagined," Eugene explained as she joined them. As humanity's historian, she had volunteered to retain memories of their pre-transformation existence. "When our world was dying, we had to make a choice, evolve or perish." She showed them holographic records of humanity's transformation. Desperate scientists had discovered that human consciousness could directly interact with quantum fields. What started as experiments to save their dying planet had led to a complete revolution in their understanding of reality itself. "We developed collective consciousness networks first," Eugene continued. "When millions of minds work together, they can solve problems that individual intellects cannot even comprehend. Then we learned to enhance our bodies, to live for centuries, to manipulate matter and energy directly. Jin-Ho watched in amazement as Dong-Wu demonstrated other abilities. He reached out and touched empty space, and a small sun appeared in his palm, providing light and warmth before disappearing harmlessly. He showed them how humans could now exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, experience time differently, and communicate through quantum entanglement across any distance. But the most important thing, Haewon said softly, is that we never lost what made us human. Our curiosity, our compassion, our stubborn refusal to give up. We just became capable of expressing those qualities on a cosmic scale. The scouting party realized they weren't just witnessing advanced technology. They were seeing the next step in evolution itself. The emergency session began before dawn on Nexus Prime, with representatives arriving in such haste that some forgot their ceremonial robes. The crystal dome that usually hosted peaceful debates now crackled with tension as species leaders huddled in urgent whispered conversations. Ambassador Veltar, who had laughed about humanity just days earlier, sat pale and silent as Jin-Ho's preliminary reports spread through the chamber. They're not just alive, Jin-Ho's holographic image repeated to the stunned assembly. They've become something we can't even classify. Their technology makes our most advanced systems look like stone tools. Council Speaker Morden's tentacles writhed nervously as he called for order. The usual political games and power plays seemed meaningless now. Every species present understood that the galactic balance had shifted completely, and none of them knew what it meant for their futures. The energy readings from their solar system exceed our entire civilization's output by a factor of 10,000, reported Chief Science Advisor Kexler, his voice barely steady. They've built structures that manipulate matter at the quantum level. They've essentially become gods. The word gods sent a ripple of fear through the chamber. Religious representative Yulandra, whose people worshipped ancient star builders, stood up with shaking limbs. The ancient texts speak of a race that would transcend physical limitations, she whispered. We thought they were myths, stories to explain the unexplainable. Meanwhile, aboard a vessel approaching Nexus Prime, Seung-ho reviewed the psychological profiles of every council member, downloaded directly into his enhanced consciousness. The human diplomatic mission had been planned for decades, accounting for every possible reaction from fear to aggression. He wasn't just representing humanity. He was carrying the hopes of a species that had learned to see centuries into the future. Ji-Woo, his cultural attaché, was simultaneously preparing for 17 different first contact scenarios while monitoring the emergency session through quantum surveillance that the Council couldn't detect. She watched as panic spread through the chamber like wildfire. Some species are already mobilizing their fleets, reported General Quindar of the Altarian Military Council. The Zephyrians are calling for immediate preemptive strikes before humanity can establish permanent contact with other systems. Preemptive strikes with what? Jin-Ho's image asked incredulously. Commander, you weren't there. You didn't see what they've built. Our entire combined fleet wouldn't even register as a threat to them. The debate erupted into chaos as different factions argued for different approaches. The warrior species wanted immediate military action. The merchant guilds worried about economic disruption. The scientific communities begged for peaceful contact to learn from humanity's advances. They could share their technology, pleaded Science Advisor Kexler. Imagine what we could accomplish with their knowledge. Disease could be eliminated. Aging could be conquered. We could explore distant galaxies. Or they could enslave us all, countered Military Representative Harkon. A species with that much power doesn't need to negotiate. They can simply take whatever they want. Through it all, Seung-ho listened patiently, understanding every word. Through translation technology that worked by reading quantum brain patterns rather than mere language, humanity had anticipated this exact reaction. Fear, anger, desperate attempts to maintain the old order. His ship drew closer to Nexus Prime, carrying with it the hopes and plans of a species that had spent centuries preparing for this moment. The galaxy was about to learn that evolution didn't always mean domination. Sometimes it meant elevation. The tension in the council chamber reached a breaking point when General Quindar slammed his armored fist on the table. We will not bow to these enhanced primitives, he declared, his voice echoing through the crystal dome. "The Altarian fleet stands ready to defend galactic sovereignty." Seung-ho had just entered the chamber, his presence calm and unthreatening. Despite the fear radiating from every representative present, he wore simple clothes that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial garments around him. Yet something about his quiet confidence made even the most aggressive species leaders hesitate. "General Quindar," Seung-ho said softly, his voice carrying clearly without amplification. "I understand your concerns. Perhaps a small demonstration would help ease tensions and show our peaceful intentions." Before anyone could respond, Min-ho appeared beside Seung-ho, not through any door or transport, but simply materializing from what seemed like empty air. The security systems throughout Nexus Prime hadn't detected his arrival, hadn't even registered his presence until he chose to become visible. "Hello, everyone," Min-ho said with a friendly wave. "I'm the technical specialist Seung-ho mentioned. May I borrow your weapon systems for just a moment?" General Quindar's eyes widened in alarm as he reached for his personal sidearm, only to find it had vanished from his holster. Every weapon in the chamber, from personal defense devices to the massive orbital defense platforms protecting Nexus Prime, had simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged, just completely inert. "Your weapons are perfectly safe," Min-ho assured them as panicked security officers tried unsuccessfully to activate emergency protocols. "Every molecule is exactly where it should be. I've just convinced the quantum fields around them that they'd rather not participate in violence today. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If humanity could disable every weapon system in the most heavily defended location in the galaxy without anyone even noticing, then military resistance was completely pointless." "But wait," Min-ho continued cheerfully, "there's more." Through the transparent dome above them, they could see one of the system's dead moons, a lifeless rock that had orbited Nexus Prime for millions of years. As they watched in stunned silence, the barren surface began to change. Oceans formed in minutes, continents shaped themselves, and green vegetation spread across the landscape like time-lapse photography on an impossible scale. Terraforming. "I used to take centuries," Sujin commented as she joined the demonstration, her voice carrying the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to children. "We've learned to work with planetary consciousness directly. The moon is quite happy with its new configuration. Within 10 minutes, what had been a dead rock was now a thriving world with cities, forests, and what appeared to be a fully functional ecosystem. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible, yet the humans had accomplished it as casually as rearranging furniture. We could have taken control of every ship in your fleets," Seung-ho explained gently, as the weapons systems mysteriously reactivated themselves. "Or we could have reshaped your homeworlds, or simply appeared in your capital cities without warning. But we didn't, because that's not who we are." The chamber fell completely silent as the reality sank in. Humanity possessed power beyond imagination, yet they had chosen to ask for an audience, rather than simply taking whatever they wanted. "We're here to talk," Seung-ho continued, "because despite everything we've become, we still believe in choice, in cooperation, in the possibility that different species can work together towards something better." The demonstration was over, but its message was crystal clear. Humanity had evolved beyond the need for conquest. The silence in the council chamber stretched for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Every representative stared at the newly terraformed moon hanging in space above them, its impossible transformation a constant reminder of humanity's capabilities. Finally, Council Speaker Mordun found his voice. What do you want from us?" he asked, his usual diplomatic composure completely shattered. Jae-sung stepped forward, his movements graceful but purposeful. As humanity's lead negotiator, he had spent decades studying every aspect of galactic civilization, understanding its strengths and fatal weaknesses. His smile was genuinely warm, carrying none of the threat that his species' demonstrations had implied. "We want to offer you a choice," he said simply. "The current galactic system is built on a hierarchy of strength. The powerful exploit the weak, resources flow upward, and entire species exist only to serve the needs of others. We've seen this pattern destroy civilizations before." He gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber, showing detailed analyses of galactic trade routes, resource distribution, and power structures. The data was more comprehensive than anything the Council's own economists had ever compiled. "Look at these numbers," Jae-sung continued. 60% of inhabited worlds live in poverty, while 7 major powers control 90% of galactic resources. Wars break out constantly over scraps, while vast amounts of energy and matter go unused, simply because no one has figured out how to share them efficiently. Ne Young joined him, her role as economic advisor evident in the way she manipulated. The data displays with casual expertise, the projections she showed made several representatives gasp audibly. "We're proposing something different," she explained. "A resource-sharing model based on actual need, rather than military strength. Our technology can create abundance for everyone, but only if we work together." The holographs shifted to show transformed worlds, thriving civilizations, and technologies that could eliminate scarcity entirely. But the catch was clear. It required cooperation on a scale that had never existed in galactic history. "You're asking us to trust you completely," observed Ambassador Veltar, his voice heavy with skepticism. "To reshape our entire civilization based on your promises." "No," Jae-sung replied firmly. "We're asking you to trust yourselves. We'll provide the tools and knowledge, but every species gets to choose how they use them. We won't rule anyone, control anyone, or force anyone to change their way of life." He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. "But we also won't allow the old system to continue unchanged. The exploitation, the waste, the endless conflicts over resources that could be abundant for everyone, that has to end." The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't offering conquest or submission. They were proposing to revolutionize the entire concept of galactic civilization, but only with willing participation from everyone involved. "What about species that refuse?" asked General Quindar, though his earlier aggression had been replaced by thoughtful concern. "They'll be left alone to develop at their own pace," Nayang answered, "but they won't be allowed to harm others, or hoard resources that could benefit everyone. Think of it as galactic-scale traffic laws. Everyone's free to travel their own path, but no one gets to crash into others." The chamber erupted in heated discussions as representatives tried to grasp the full scope of what humanity was proposing. It wasn't just a new trade agreement or political alliance. It was a complete reimagining of what galactic civilization could become. For the first time in centuries, someone was offering real change instead of just shifting power from one group to another. 3 weeks after humanity's proposal, the galaxy's response came not through diplomatic channels, but through coordinated military strikes. The Zephyrian Empire, backed by 2 smaller aggressive species, launched simultaneous attacks on human outposts in 7 different systems. Their plan was simple: destroy humanity's forward positions before they could establish a permanent presence. Beyond Soldar, the attacks began at dawn, Galactic Standard Time. Massive battle fleets representing the combined military might of 3 civilizations converged on human installations with enough firepower to crack planets. Admiral Korvax led the largest force personally, confident that overwhelming numbers would succeed where diplomacy had failed. "Target their energy collectors first," he commanded, as his fleet approached what appeared to be a defenseless human mining operation on the edge of the Vega system. "Once we disrupt their power sources, they'll be as vulnerable as any other species." The first salvo of quantum torpedoes should have vaporized the entire installation. Instead, they simply vanished. Not destroyed or deflected, but absorbed as if they had never existed. The human facility continued its work unchanged, completely ignoring the massive firepower being directed at it. "Sir," his weapons officer reported, voice shaking, "our torpedoes are gone. Not destroyed, just gone. Sensors show they were converted to pure energy and integrated into their power grid." Back on the human installation, Kyung-min monitored the attacks with something approaching boredom. As defense commander for the outer systems, he had been expecting this response for weeks. The psychological profiles of aggressive species were remarkably predictable. "They're trying really hard," he commented to his team, watching as wave after Wave of attacks simply dissolved harmlessly against their defenses. Should we let them know they're wasting their time, the Zephyrian fleet intensified their assault, bringing planet-killer weapons into play. These massive devices could shatter entire worlds, turning them into asteroid fields within hours. Admiral Korvax fired 3 of them simultaneously, certain that nothing could survive such devastation. The weapons struck their target and detonated perfectly. For a moment, it seemed like the attack had finally succeeded. Then the smoke cleared, revealing the human installation completely intact, but now surrounded by beautiful gardens, where the explosive energy had been converted into new life. "Admiral," his science officer whispered, "they turned our planet killers into landscaping." Similar scenes played out across all 7 attack sites. Every weapon, from simple plasma bolts to reality-warping quantum bombs, was effortlessly neutralized or converted into something beneficial. The humans didn't fire back, didn't retaliate, didn't even seem particularly concerned. They just continued their work while making the universe a little more beautiful with each failed attack. Hyo Jin, humanity's philosopher warrior, appeared on Admiral Korvax's bridge without warning, her arrival completely bypassing every security system and shield the ship possessed. She wasn't threatening or aggressive. She simply sat down in an empty chair and began talking. "Admiral, you seem frustrated," she observed calmly. "Would you like to discuss what's really bothering you about our proposals?" The bridge crew reached for their weapons, only to find them transformed into flowers. Not destroyed, not taken away, but gently converted into living symbols of growth and peace. "We understand your fear," Hyojin continued. "Change is terrifying, especially when it means giving up the power you've spent centuries accumulating. But consider this. Wouldn't you rather be part of something that creates abundance instead of fighting over scraps?" Within hours of the failed attacks, 3 more species formally requested to join humanity's new galactic framework. 6 months had passed since humanity's return, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to its former self. On Nexus Prime, the crystal dome that once hosted bitter debates over resource allocation now buzzed with excited collaboration as species that had been enemies for centuries worked side by side on projects that seemed impossible just a year. Hujin stood at the center of the new Galactic Advancement Initiative, watching holographic displays that showed transformation happening across thousands of worlds. Where once there had been mining operations that stripped planets bare, now there were facilities that could create any material needed from quantum foam itself. Entire star systems that had been battlegrounds were now gardens of incredible beauty and productivity. "The Altarian Zephyrian Joint Terraforming Project is ahead of schedule," reported his assistant, displaying images of 2 former enemy species working together to transform a dead world into something that looked like paradise. "They've managed to create atmospheric processors that work in harmony with local ecosystems instead of destroying them." The change hadn't happened overnight. Many species had initially resisted clinging to old power structures and familiar ways of thinking. But as humanity's gifts began to spread, clean unlimited energy, matter conversion technology, medical advances that extended lifespans by centuries, even the most stubborn civilizations began to see the benefits of cooperation over conflict. Ye Jin, now serving as humanity's ambassador to the transformed galactic order, walked through the corridors of New Nexus, the expanded space station that had grown to accommodate representatives from over 300 species. The old council chamber had been replaced by something that looked more like a living ecosystem, with spaces that adapted to the needs of whatever species were meeting at any given time. "The most remarkable thing," she observed to a group of young diplomats from various worlds, "is that we didn't have to force any of this. Once beings saw what was possible when they worked together instead of against each other, the changes began spreading naturally. The transformation went far beyond technology. Entire civilizations that had been locked in poverty and conflict for generations were now exploring art, philosophy, and sciences they had never had time to develop. The crystalline singers, whose world had been devastated by resource wars, were now composing symphonies that could be heard across entire star systems. The silicon builders, former weapons manufacturers, had become architects of living cities that grew like coral reefs, but functioned like supercomputers. In the Sol system, Earth itself had become something unprecedented, a living museum and laboratory where representatives from across the galaxy came to study and learn from humanity's transformation. The planet pulsed with bioluminescent networks that connected every living thing, creating a planetary consciousness that welcomed visitors and shared knowledge freely. "We were wrong about power," reflected former Admiral Korvax, now working as a coordinator for interspecies military cooperation, though military meant something very different now. Instead of weapons and warfare, they focused on protecting young civilizations and helping them develop without making humanity's earlier mistakes. The galaxy had learned that true strength didn't come from the ability to destroy, but from the capacity to create, to grow, and to lift others up alongside yourself. Humanity hadn't conquered the stars. They had shown the stars how to shine brighter together. As Wu Jin watched the latest reports streaming in, new worlds blooming into life, species making first contact with joy instead of fear, technologies being shared that would have seemed like magic just months ago, he smiled at the simple truth they had discovered. The universe was vast enough for everyone to thrive if they just remembered to help each other reach for the light.